Have you ever seen someone throw away an old pair of shoes without realizing they could still change someone's life? Most people looked at them as trash. My father looked at them as hope. People laughed at our tiny shoe repair shop. They said, "Nobody repairs shoes anymore. You're wasting your life. Your little shop will disappear soon." But they were wrong, because one forgotten little shop would one day become America's biggest custom shoe brand. My name is Robinson, and I'm 18 years old. Everything you're about to hear really happened to my family. This is our story. Before we begin, if you enjoy emotional family success stories, please like this video, share it with your family and friends, subscribe to the channel, and comment where you're watching from. Your support inspires us to create more powerful stories every day. Now, let's begin. Our little shoe repair shop stood on an old street in Boston, Massachusetts. Every morning at exactly 9 a.m., Dad unlocked the faded wooden door. He switched on the old workshop light, picked up his worn leather apron, and began repairing shoes, even before a single customer arrived. The shop wasn't beautiful. The walls were old. The shelves were filled with worn-out boots, old sneakers, and dusty tools that had been there for decades. Across the street, a huge modern shoe store opened. People crowded inside. Nobody looked at our little shop anymore. Still, Dad never complained. He simply smiled and kept working. Weeks passed. Business became worse. One customer, then none. Dad sat quietly near the front window, watching hundreds of people walk past. Not one of them opened our door. That evening, he counted the money. Only $18. It wasn't even enough to pay the electricity bill. Mom looked worried, but Dad simply said, "Tomorrow will be better." I wanted to believe him. One afternoon, a businessman walked into the shop. He looked around, then laughed. He said, "You're still repairing shoes?" This business died years ago. He threw an old pair of leather shoes onto the table, then added, "Fix them if you can, but I doubt anyone with a shop like this knows quality anymore." Dad didn't argue. He quietly picked up the shoes, smiled, and got to work. I watched every movement carefully because I knew Dad wasn't just repairing shoes. He was protecting his dream. That night, Dad handed me a small polishing brush. Then he said, "Robinson, never repair a shoe just to earn money. Repair it so well that the owner smiles the moment they wear it again." Those words stayed with me forever. From that day, every afternoon after school, I worked beside him, learning, watching, listening. Without realizing it, I was preparing for the biggest journey of my life. The following Monday, a letter arrived. Dad opened it slowly. His smile disappeared. The landlord had raised the rent. If we couldn't pay within 60 days, we would lose the shop. Mom quietly wiped away her tears. Dad folded the letter, placed it inside a drawer, then walked back to his workbench, picked up another old pair of shoes, and continued working. At that moment, I silently made myself one promise. No matter what happened, I would save my father's dream. The next morning, Dad handed me an old pair of torn leather shoes. He smiled and said, "Today, you repair your first pair." My hands were shaking. I made mistakes. I stitched one side twice. The polish wasn't perfect, but Dad never stopped me. Instead, he quietly said, "Perfection comes after patience." That customer returned 2 days later. He smiled, then handed me a $20 tip. It was the first money I had ever earned. After school, I stopped playing with my friends. Instead, I spent every afternoon inside the workshop. I learned stitching, leather cutting, color matching, hand polishing. Slowly, customers started asking, "Where's the young boy?" They wanted me to repair their shoes. For the first time, hope returned to our little shop. One afternoon, I accidentally ruined an expensive leather boot. I froze. I thought Dad would be angry. Instead, he put his hand on my shoulder, then quietly said, "Never fear mistakes. Fear giving up." That day, I became stronger. Late one night, while looking at old shoes, an idea came into my mind. Instead of only repairing shoes, why not create custom handmade shoes? Something unique, something nobody else offered. Dad looked at my drawing. He smiled, then simply said, "Let's try." For 2 weeks, we worked day and night. When we finally finished, the customer couldn't believe his eyes. He smiled, then ordered 3 more pairs. Soon, other people started asking for custom designs too. Our future was beginning to change. One morning, a local businessman walked into our shop. He had heard about our handmade shoes. He ordered 25 custom pairs for his employees. Dad looked at me, then smiled. For the first time in years, our workshop was full of work. For weeks, we barely slept. Every pair had to be perfect. Our hands became sore. Our backs hurt. But every finished shoe reminded us, dreams are built one step at a time. The tiny repair shop became too crowded. We rented a small workshop nearby. It wasn't luxurious, but it was ours. Dad hung the old shop key on the wall. He said, "Never forget where this journey started." Soon, we couldn't do everything ourselves. We hired one young shoemaker, then another, then 5 more. Our little family business was slowly becoming a company. A financial crisis hit the city. Orders stopped. Bills kept growing. People told Dad, "Sell everything while you still can." Dad looked at me and quietly said, "We've survived worse." So we kept going. Some suppliers offered us cheaper materials. It would have saved thousands of dollars. Dad refused. He said, "People remember quality long after they forget the price." That decision changed our future. Customers weren't just buying shoes anymore. They were buying our craftsmanship. People began recommending us to their friends. Slowly, our brand became known across Boston. Years later, we opened our first official showroom. I stood outside, looking at our name above the entrance. Dad quietly whispered, "This is only the beginning." Orders started arriving from other states: California, Texas, Florida, Chicago. People wanted shoes made by our family. The little repair shop had become a nationwide business. 14 years after everything began, we opened our largest showroom. Customers stood in long lines. The same people who once laughed were now proudly wearing our shoes. One afternoon, Dad and I walked back to our old repair shop. Nothing had changed. The old wooden door, the faded sign, the tiny workbench. Dad touched the door and smiled. Dad looked at me, then said, "Robinson." People thought we repaired old shoes, but what we really repaired was hope. I'll never forget those words. Today, our custom shoe brand is known across America. But every time I see an old pair of worn-out shoes, I remember that tiny shop where everyone laughed, and my father never stopped believing. If this journey taught me one thing, it's this: never underestimate small beginnings. With hard work, patience, and faith, even the smallest dream can leave the biggest footprint.